The tracers are already in the air, to Messerschmitts, diving from opposite angles, have him locked. He's alone at 8,000 feet, with nowhere to run and a fighter that can't outglim, can't outrun, can't do anything the manual says he needs to survive this moment. Every instinct, every hour of training, every combat briefing says the same thing. Spring 1943, the Mediterranean is a graveyard for Allied pilots. Not metaphorically, fuel slicks spread for miles, life vests wash up on beaches in Tunisia, Malta, Libya. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. In the first 4 months of 1943, Allied fighter squadrons in the Mediterranean lose more pilots than they can replace. Some units cycle through their entire roster in 6 weeks, 11 flights. Then a small notation in a logbook, an empty bunk, and another replacement stepping off a transport with fresh insignia and uncertain eyes. The Germans own the sky here. Their Messerschmitt 109s are faster, climb better, fight at higher altitudes where the thin air gives them every advantage. Together, they hunt in coordinated pairs, using tactics refined over years of combat in Spain, France, Poland, Russia. They choose when to engage, when to break off, when to press the kill. But the odds don't improve, they get worse. Because the aircraft don't change, the frame can absorb punishment that would tear apart lighter fighters. But reliability doesn't matter when you're too slow to escape and too heavy to climb. The P-40 can't catch a Messerschmitt in a dive. Inside the cockpit, the reality is immediate and visceral. Pilots wear leather jackets not because they recold, but because touching bare skin to the fuselage means second-degree burns. Oil vapor coats the windscreen. The stick vibrates constantly, transmitting every imperfection in the airframe, every turbulence in the air. To see ahead, pilots have to weave the aircraft side to side, exposing themselves to attack every time they turn. Every shadow could be an enemy, every cloud could hide a killer. The fear isn't abstract, it's physical. Tactical doctrine is clear, written in blood over 2 years of European combat. Maintain altitude, keep your speed up. Never turn with an enemy fighter, fight in pairs, cover each other. Break off if you're outnumbered. The rules work when you have options, when you can choose your fights. When the performance gap isn't so wide that every decision is already made for you. They can't run, they can't refuse engagement. Most don't scatter in time, most don't get a second chance. Then it tips over and dives, gravity does the work. Speed builds to over 400 miles per hour. The distance closes in seconds. Cannon shells walk up the fuselage, through the cockpit, into the engine. Fire blooms orange and black, the aircraft tumbles, shedding pieces. The pilot, if he's conscious, has maybe 4 seconds to decide whether to ride it down or bail out into the Mediterranean, where the water is cold and rescue unlikely. Between missions, pilots sit in the shade of wing roots and don't talk about the obvious. They discuss deflection angles instead, argue about ammunition loads. Sketch diagrams in the sand with sticks, drawing arcs and vectors, trying to find some geometric solution to a problem that seems to have none. Some believe better equipment will arrive, Spitfires, maybe Mustangs, something that can fight on equal terms. A few have stopped believing in answers at all. They fly because orders say to fly. They fight because the alternative is court-martial. Ground crews work through the nights, patching bullet holes with riveted aluminum, replacing shattered canopies. Scrubbing blood from seats and control sticks, they develop rituals. Some refuse to service an aircraft that's lost to pilots, because logic offers no comfort when the statistics say you're next. Graphs show kill ratios trending the wrong direction. Reports recommend tactical adjustments that sound reasonable on paper and fail in practice. Commanders send cables up the chain, requesting better aircraft, more fuel, longer training cycles for replacement pilots. The war is global. Resources flow where they're most desperately needed, and the Mediterranean is a secondary theater. They fly their obsolete fighters against superior opponents and hope that skill or luck or sheer bloody-minded stubbornness will be enough. And on those days, They come back and they sit in the shade and they try to figure out what they did right so they can do it again tomorrow. Then a quiet pilot from Texas with a notebook full of sketches starts asking questions that make the veterans uncomfortable. Not because the questions are stupid, because they're too smart. Because they point at assumptions everyone has stopped examining. Because they suggest that maybe, just maybe, everyone has been thinking about the problem wrong. His name is Lance Wade, and he doesn't look like someone who's about to change air combat forever. He's thin, soft-spoken, polite to a fault. He has a small-town drawl that makes him sound younger than he is. He doesn't drink much, doesn't tell stories in the mess tent. After missions, he disappears to his quarters while other pilots play cards or write letters home. He's not antisocial, he's just preoccupied. His mind is somewhere else, turning over equations, replaying maneuvers, trying to solve a problem no one else thinks is solvable. Wade grew up in Reclaw, Texas, population barely breaking 3 digits. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, and the biggest excitement is Saturday night at the general store. His father ran a small farm. Wade helped with the work but spent every spare hour at the local airstrip, a dirt runway outside Broadus where barnstormers and airmail pilots sometimes stopped. He traded labor for lessons, swept hangars, helped with repairs. Learned to fly in a beat-up trainer that shook like it might fall apart but never did. He wasn't a natural. Some pilots have instinct, a feel for the aircraft that seems innate. Wade had to work for everything. He studied textbooks on aerodynamics, engine performance, structural engineering. He read accident reports, trying to understand what went wrong and why. He kept detailed logs, noting not just flight hours but conditions. Wind speed, temperature, barometric pressure. How the aircraft handled under different loads. He approached flying the way a craftsman approaches his trade, with patience and precision and respect for the underlying principles. When war broke out in Europe, Wade tried to enlist in the Army Air Corps. He was rejected. Poor eyesight, correctable with glasses, but the standards were inflexible. He tried again 6 months later, rejected again. By then, he heard about a British recruiting program. The Royal Air Force was desperate for pilots, and their medical standards were less rigid. Wade volunteered. In late 1940, he boarded a ship for England, one of dozens of Americans who would fight for Britain before the United States entered the war. Training was abbreviated. Wade was assigned to a fighter squadron, then reassigned, then shipped to North Africa early 1942 as the Desert Campaign intensified. Then P-40s started arriving from American production lines, and Wade transitioned to the Warhawk. It was familiar, American-built, closer to the trainers he'd flown in Texas, but it was also immediately clear that the P-40 was outclassed in every metric that mattered. South Africans who flew with reckless aggression. Australians who treated combat like sport. Rhodesians, Canadians, a handful of other Americans. They called themselves the Desert Air Force, a deliberately informal name for a deliberately unconventional unit. They were understaffed, under-equipped, and constantly outnumbered. They survived through improvisation and stubbornness and a collective refusal to acknowledge how bad the odds were. Wade didn't stand out initially. He was competent, reliable, unremarkable. He followed orders, he stayed in formation, he didn't take unnecessary risks. Not letters, notes. He sketched dogfights from memory, drawing arcs and angles, estimating speeds and closure rates. He was trying to understand something fundamental about air combat, something that eluded formal doctrine. Most pilots think in terms of maneuvers, brake left, split S, Chandelle, Immelman. The names are reassuring. Potential energy and kinetic energy, the conversion of altitude into speed. The cost of turning measured in velocity bled away. He began to see air combat not as a collection of discrete maneuvers, but as a continuous negotiation with physics. Every action had a cost. Doctrine taught what to do. Wade wanted to understand why. Why did a Messerschmitt have the advantage? Because it was faster. Why did turning fights favor the aggressor? because turning cost speed and the slower aircraft became a target. But what if that wasn't always true? What if, under specific conditions, losing speed could be an advantage? He tested how tight he could turn before the aircraft shuddered into a stall. Paint scraped from wingtips where he'd come too close to the edge. Wade's squadron leader was a veteran of the Battle of Britain, a by-the-book officer who valued discipline and formation integrity. When Wade started asking technical questions during briefings, the leader answered curtly. Doctrine existed for a reason. It was written in blood, refined through experience. Pilots who freelance died. The discussion ended there. But Wade couldn't stop thinking. The P-40 was slower than a Messerschmitt. It climbed worse. It couldn't outrun the enemy. Doctrine said to avoid turning fights because turning bled speed. But what if the P-40 could turn tighter? He knew the numbers: wing loading, power to weight ratio. The P-40's lower wing loading meant better low-speed handling. But Doctrine said never to try. Turning made you slow. Slow made you dead. Every manual agreed. Wade started to wonder if everyone was wrong. Not about the basics. Turning did bleed speed. Slow aircraft were vulnerable, but what if the vulnerability window was shorter than everyone assumed? The maneuver formed slowly in his mind over weeks of thought and sketches. Maximum G-load. Bleeding speed deliberately to tighten the radius. The goal wasn't to escape. It required perfect timing. Too early, and the attacker adjusted. Too late, and the shells arrived first. It required ignoring every instinct that screamed to keep speed, to dive, to run. It was the opposite of Doctrine. It was suicide unless it worked. Wade had no way to test it safely. Training flights didn't simulate an attacker diving at 400 miles per hour. And if he was wrong, there wouldn't be a second chance. Pilots who deviate die. He would be ordered to stop. He would be grounded for his own safety. The idea would die with him, so he said nothing. He filed the maneuver away in his notebook, a theoretical solution to an impossible problem. And he waited for the moment when survival alone wouldn't be enough. The transport lumbers below, heavy and vulnerable. The mission is routine, the radio chatter is sparse. Then the call rips through the headset, bandits high. 2 o'clock, diving, standard procedure. Wade's hand tightens on the stick. His breathing slows. Wade sees the muzzle flashes, bright and distinct. Tracers arc toward him, lazy looking but covering distance impossibly fast. He has maybe 2 seconds. Don't give either away. His instinct screams the same message. The stick comes into his lap. Full aft pressure, the nose pitches up violently. The horizon spins. His vision tunnels to gray, then black at the edges. The engine shrieks in protest, the wings flex, bending visibly, and the world rotates. The Messerschmitt flashes past, too fast, too committed to the attack to adjust. It overshoots. Wade rolls out of the turn. He's slow, dangerously slow. The second Messerschmitt is still diving. Wade has no speed to run, no altitude to trade. He pulls again. Same maneuver, same violence, his vision grays. He holds the turn. Holds it past the point where muscle memory screams to release. Wade rolls wings level. The Messerschmitts don't press the attack. They climb away, unwilling to descend again into the same trap. Wade turns back toward the transport. His legs feel like water. His whole body trembles with adrenaline dump. He lands without speaking. The ground crew inspects the aircraft. No damage, no hits. He sits on his cot. His hands won't stop shaking. He pulls out his notebook. He sketches the encounter. Every angle, every second. Repeatable. He calls Wade into his tent and asks him to explain the maneuver. He tells him the maneuver is reckless, dangerous, contrary to established doctrine. He salutes. He needs other pilots to see it work. The moment the Messerschmitt commits, Wade pulls. The same violent turn. The same edge of stall arc. The same overshoot. He pulls into a climbing turn, tracking the Messerschmitt as it tries to escape. Another survival. Wade explains slowly, carefully. He draws diagrams in the sand outside the operations tent. He talks about timing, about when to initiate the pull, about how to recognize the moment when the attacker is committed and cannot adjust. The next mission, they're attacked. The wingman tries the maneuver. He overshoots his timing, pulling too early. The Messerschmitt adjusts, but the wingman survives long enough to try again. On the next engagement, he gets the timing right. He forces an overshoot. He lives. Pilots ask Wade questions in quiet voices. He begins informal briefings after missions, sketching on scraps of paper, demonstrating with his hands. Some pilots are skeptical. Gradually, quietly, the maneuver circulates. It has no official name. Pilots call it Wade's turn. Some call it the last-ditch break. A few call it suicide with a chance. The squadron leader hears about it. He's furious. He calls Wade in again. He threatens to ground him. Wade listens calmly. Then he asks a simple question. How many pilots have survived using the maneuver? The leader doesn't have an answer ready. Wade provides 7 pilots, 8 engagements, 0 losses. The numbers speak louder than doctrine. The leader dismisses Wade without further comment, but he doesn't issue the grounding order. He can't argue with survival rates. June 1943, a larger engagement. A full German fighter group bounces an Allied squadron. 12 P-40s against 20 Messerschmitts. The radio erupts with calls. Wade pulls his maneuver twice, forcing overshoots, staying alive around him. Other pilots do the same. Attacks that should succeed fail. Firing solutions that should be simple evaporate. Confusion spreads. In previous engagements of similar size, losses averaged 50%. This time, 75% survive. The math is undeniable. Something has changed. After-action reports reach higher command. Intelligence officers take note. A flight instructor is sent to interview Wade. The instructor is skeptical. He's heard about maverick pilots before, about lucky breaks mistaken for technique. He asks Wade to demonstrate. Wade takes him up in a 2-seat trainer. At altitude, he simulates the maneuver, slow, controlled, but violent enough that the instructor experiences the G-forces, the buffet of the stall, the sickening moment when the aircraft seems to stop flying and just fall. The instructor lands pale and quiet. He files a report recommending immediate evaluation. Engineers measure turning radius, G-loads, speed loss. They confirm what Wade intuited. Doctrine is quietly updated. No announcement, no public reversal. But the training syllabus changes. Instructors emphasize timing and aircraft control. The maneuver is paired with situational awareness, ensuring pilots know when to use it and when conventional tactics apply. It's not a replacement for sound doctrine, it's an additional tool. Pilots across the Mediterranean theater are using it. Some modify it, adding roles or vertical components. The Luftwaffe begins to adapt. They become more cautious, less willing to press attacks when a target might reverse unexpectedly. Caution slows aggression, that alone saves lives. Wade's personal tally grows through turning defensive necessity into offensive opportunity. He's promoted, given a flight to command. He continues flying, continues teaching. It's not one factor. New aircraft arrive. P-51 Mustangs. Spitfire Mark 9s, training improves, logistics strengthen. But in the crucial months of mid-1943, when the balance hung on a razor's edge, one maneuver made measurable difference. Statistical analysis conducted after the war shows P-40 loss rates in the Mediterranean dropped by 18% between April and August 1943. Intelligence reports from captured Luftwaffe pilots mention Allied fighters using unexpected defensive tactics. German training manuals are updated to warn against overcommitting to attacks on P-40s. The ripple is subtle but real. More than numbers, the maneuver changes mindset. Allied pilots stop seeing themselves as victims. They stop accepting inferiority as inevitable. They learn that even outmatched aircraft can fight back, that physics and courage can compensate for performance gaps. Morale improves, confidence grows. Pilots fly more aggressively, knowing they have an option if an engagement turns bad. Wade himself becomes a quiet legend. He's not flashy, he doesn't seek fame, but pilots talk about him. Some of the stories are exaggerated, most are not. By the end of 1943, Wade has flown over 200 combat missions. He has 13 confirmed kills. He has never lost a wingman. That last statistic is the one that matters most. In a war where survival is measured in missions, Wade brings people home. Heavy, armored, powerful. It doesn't need Wade's maneuver. It overpowers opponents through raw performance. He continues to teach. He continues to think about energy and geometry, looking for inefficiencies in bomber escort tactics, studying ways to improve survivability. On a routine training flight in January, Wade's aircraft suffers catastrophic engine failure during takeoff. The news spreads quietly through the squadrons. Pilots who knew him attend his service in a dusty field outside Naples. There's no ceremony. A chaplain says a few words, a bugler plays taps. Someone mentions that Wade never talked much, never sought the spotlight. Someone else says that's exactly why he mattered. Then the war moves on, one more among thousands. There is no medal, no official commendation. It becomes part of the unofficial canon of fighter tactics, passed pilot to pilot, squadron to squadron, spreading through the networks that connect combat flyers across theaters and nations. Wade's defensive break is analyzed in technical journals. Test pilots recreate it in modern aircraft. It becomes a case study in energy management, a lesson in how to fight from disadvantage. In the 1950s, the maneuver is formalized in United States Air Force training as the high-G defensive break. It's taught to jet pilots facing faster misalarmed adversaries. The principles remain unchanged. The names of those who use it are recorded in training logs and after-action reports. Today, fighter pilots around the world learn variations of Wade's maneuver. The physics are well understood now. Computers model turning performance, simulators replicate the G-forces. But the core insight remains Wade's. Lance Wade's grave is in a military cemetery in Italy. Few visitors stop. There's no statue, no plaque explaining his contribution. Scattered mentions in memoirs of pilots who flew with him. Because the men he saved scattered to other squadrons, other theaters, other lives. But physics doesn't forget. The equations he understood still govern flight. The principles he demonstrated still apply. In the archives, his sketches remain, precise diagrams of arcs and vectors. A quiet testament to a mind that saw past doctrine to deeper truth, through the sweep of armies and the clash of fleets. By a pilot alone in a cockpit, calculating angles while death dives toward him. By the choice to trust logic over fear, Wade didn't seek to be a hero, he sought to solve a problem. He approached air combat the way he approached everything, methodically, patiently, with respect for the underlying mechanics. He didn't invent courage. He didn't discover some secret weapon. Not how to run faster, but how to turn tighter. Not how to avoid the fight, but how to survive it. The lesson is that one man, thinking clearly under pressure, found a margin of advantage that others missed, and that margin multiplied across hundreds of engagements, across dozens of pilots, became the difference between loss and survival. Between despair and hope, between a doctrine that accepted defeat and a tactic that demanded something better. Wade's story is a reminder that innovation doesn't always come from laboratories or high commands. Sometimes it comes from the edge of a stall. From a quiet voice asking uncomfortable questions. From the stubborn belief that there must be another way and the courage to prove it when no one else will. The skies over the Mediterranean are peaceful now. The wreckage has long been cleared. The air bases are silent or repurposed. But the principles remain encoded in training manuals, passed through generations of pilots who will never know the name of the small-town Texan who first pulled that desperate, defiant turn. Some legacies are carved in stone, others are written in the physics of survival. One more calculation, one more chance to turn inside the enemy's arc and prove that disadvantage is not destiny. That logic and courage combined can reshape the geometry of war itself. And somewhere, in some cockpit, over some battlefield, a pilot facing impossible odds will pull back hard on the stick and will survive because a quiet man from Texas spent his nights sketching equations and refused to accept that the way things were was the only way they could be.